So again, I'm Jennifer Lutes. I do work for the University of Missouri Extension, and today I'm going to be talking about marketing sheep and goats, and we're really going to look at supply and demand in the United States and within Missouri, and how you can find some prices to figure out how to price your own animals if you are not marketing through traditional channels. We're going to break this up into such a way that we're going to look at the U.S. sheep industry and then the U.S. goat industry, and then we'll bring it down to the state level and then down to personally kind of how you can make it work for you. So we'll start off with the U.S. sheep industry. As we look at population of the U.S. sheep industry from 1900 to 2020, you can see that right about the 1940s, mid-1940s, early 1950s, we had a major drop in our sheep and lamb population in the United States. We suspect a lot of this is due to wool trade issues that we had and the introduction of synthetic fibers and the lack of desire to eat mutton post-war and post-depression. When we look at our population across the United States from January 2020, we can see that most of our sheep are heavily concentrated in the Western United States. Missouri is number 14 in the ranking of the number of sheep in the state, but we fall behind some big leaders in that. Notoriously, Texas leads the way, and then California, and then followed by some of those Midwest, Western states there. When we look at the change, a 10-year change from January 1 of 2010 to January 1 of 2020, we can actually see though that those Western states are decreasing their population of sheep and lambs, and the Eastern, Midwest and Eastern states are starting to pick up those numbers. Overall, we've had a change of 7.5 million head, I believe it is, across the United States in these 10 years. So we start looking at the production and imports of sheep meat in the United States. This red line here that you're looking at is the production over the last roughly 20 years. This goes to 2019. And you can see that we've had kind of a downward trend of our production since 2000. And that goes back to the 1900s even. What's interesting to note, though, is that our imports are slowly but steadily increasing over the last 20 years. And then we look at this blue line up here, and that is what we consider consumption. So that is our U.S. production minus any exports that we do, which is very, very, very small. And then plus our imports that we bring in to kind of look at what our consumption is in the United States. It's been pretty steady for the last 10 years or so. In 2019, we did process 4.6 million sheep in the United States. So that's kind of what's given us these 1,000 tons of sheep meat here that we're looking at on that red line in 2019. Over 32% of the US consumption is actually imported. And 99% of our imports that we bring into the United States come from Australia and New Zealand, with roughly 90 to 95% coming from Australia and about 4 to 5% of those coming from New Zealand. When we look at the top 5 countries that import sheep meat, we have data as early as 2018. The United States is actually the second largest importer of sheep meat in the world. We're second to China. China imports a lot more sheep meat than anybody else. But some curious information here is that in 2016 and 2013, which were the previous reports for this, we were actually 4th largest. So we're increasing our imports of sheep meat over the years. So in 2018, we were sitting at about 109 metric tons of sheep meat that was imported into the United States. And that's both lamb and mutton, predominantly lamb though. So as we switch gears a little bit and we look at the sheep industry in Missouri, you can see our population from 1990 to 2020. And we had a fairly decent drop in population from about 1990 to 2000. And since then, we've steadied out, and the last five to 6 years or so, we've kind of increased our population. That red line is all sheep, and then that blue line is actually our lamb crop. So we've had a pretty steady lamb crop over the last 10 to 15 years here in Missouri. If we look across the state to kind of see where those sheep are across the state, this comes from our ag census, which is done every 5 years, the last one being finished in 2017. We can kind of see that we have some pockets of heavier sheep production across the state, and that tends to coincide with some of our more rugged landscapes, to be honest with you, geographically. When we take a look at the sheep and goats that are sold in Missouri, so we have 6 market reported auctions in Missouri. The USDA comes in and actually reports those auctions. They report prices and what's sold, what classes are sold, weights, those types of things. We can see that roughly 65% of the head moving through our Missouri sheep and goat reported auctions are sheep, and about 35% of those head are goats. What you're seeing here, these are our 6 reported auctions across the state. You've got one in St. Joseph, Missouri, one in Diamond, Missouri, Norwood, Missouri, Buffalo, Fruitland, and Montgomery City in Missouri. So you can kind of see where they're located, and they're predominantly located around those higher production areas where we've got more animals concentrated in the landmass. As we move forward and break down the sheep that are sold in Missouri, 78% of the sheep that are run through our 6 reported auctions are hair sheep, 22% of those being wool sheep. We can break that down just a little bit further, and we can see that of our total head, 69% fall into the slaughter class of hair sheep, 3% fall into that replacement class of hair sheep, and 6% are being sold as in the feeder class for hair sheep. On the wool side, we're looking at about 20% of the sheep are for slaughter, 1% replacement, and 1% feeder. So if we look at prices now, that was inventory previously, and now we're going to kind of look at prices. We pull prices from San Angelo, Texas, because San Angelo is the largest sheep and goat auction in the country. They sell a lot of head through that auction, and they are a reported auction, so it's easy to get price discovery from that facility. What you're seeing here, this red line is our average, a 5-year average from 2014 to 2018. The dotted line is your 2019 pricing, and then the blue solid line is your 2020 pricing so far. We haven't finished 2020, therefore the graph is not quite finished yet. Now this particular graph is for feeder lambs in San Angelo, running in that 60 to 90 pound range. And you can see it's been kind of a wild ride this year. This deep devis that you see kind of early on in the graph, that's going to be when COVID started and the uncertainty around March. We rebounded and then kind of fell back down, and we're starting to steady out. And now the last quarter or so, prices have really been going up for our feeder lambs and our slaughter sheep. Box lamb prices have gone through pretty high as well over our average 5-year average. So you can see 2020 currently, our average annual price, we're sitting at about $1 or $187 per hundredweight, or $1.87 a pound. And 2019, we had an average price of $1.77 a hundredweight. When we look at the slaughter lamb prices, so that previous was our feeder lambs, this is now our slaughter lambs, you can see that our slaughter lambs they've kind of stayed on our 5-year track. Again, you've got our 5-year average in the red, 2019 in the dots, and solid blue line is your 2020. But they are inching up above that 5-year average here in the last quarter. So these are your 100 and 150 pound lambs at San Angelo. The average price on your slaughter lambs so far in 2020 was about $140 per hundredweight, and average price in 2019 was $133 per hundredweight. We look at strictly Missouri, and this I say combined auctions because this is all 6 of our market reported combined auctions. This is a 12-month look back, so it starts with December of 19, and it is a monthly, and it goes through November of 20. These are specifically sorted out to be wool lambs. What you're seeing here is our red line is our pricing for the year. It's been pretty steady for the year. We didn't have that major drop. We had a little bit of a drop in April, but we rebounded really quickly back in May. We've had pretty steady prices this year. We don't see in this 12-month look back the seasonal price that we typically would see in our sheep and goats. One thing I would like to draw your attention to, these blue bars down here are the number of heads sold, and this is a slaughter class. And I want you to notice that predominantly the bulk of our animals are sold between May and roughly September. And we typically see a price decline during that time of the year. If we change this graph up just a little bit and we're going to look at the hair lambs are notoriously lighter. That's why you're seeing a lighter weight class. We do see a bit of the seasonality in the price line there, where we start dropping in price May to June, and then picking back up, November into December. Again, you're going to see the bulk of our sales being sold from May to September, and typically that is when we see that lower price for the season. So we're going to switch gears back to Texas. Like I said, Texas has it so that we can do price discovery, historical price discovery, which is why we tend to use them. And they do tend to set the prices for the country. So we're not going to see wildly different prices from Texas than we do to our market reported sales here in Missouri. They're going to be fairly consistent and similar in each month. So what you're looking at here is a seasonal price index for the feeder lambs, the 60 to 90 pound lambs for Texas prices. This one is our average annual price for the year, this solid line here in the middle. The red line here is going to be our average index. So how far above or below we are from the average annual price in any given month in the year. And what you're seeing here is generally seasonally starting in December, running through about May, we have annual prices that are monthly prices that are above the average annual high. And then May to roughly November, we have prices that are generally below that average annual for the year. That's that seasonal price index, and this is really based on supply and demand and the fact that we are marketing a whole lot of animals between May and October, November, and we market a lot less animals in the early months of the year, in the winter months. This is showing a 20% price swing between our seasonal high in February and our seasonal low in August. So kind of what that means for you is if you have the options to pick the time of year to sell your sheep, sell them between December and May, targeting February if you can, and to hit those seasonal high prices. If you have to sell sheep through June and November, do it only if you have to. If you can hold on to those animals without changing the prices, without feeding too much or putting too much inputs into them, then hold them until December, sometime between December and May. So we're going to change up a little bit here and look at the U.S. goat meat industry. Population from 2003 to 2019. You can see that as our interest in goats increased from 2003 to about 2008, we had a dramatic rise in the number of goats in the United States. From about 2008 to 2013, we saw those numbers really decrease, and we've leveled out really since roughly 2013. Looking around the country to see who's producing goats, Texas, again, is the leader in goat production. Missouri is the 5th largest producer in goat production, and we are preceded by Tennessee, Oklahoma, California, and Texas. We look at that this is a 1-year change now in our meat goats. You can see who is increasing and who is decreasing on their numbers. Again, our top 5 states other than California have all been increasing their meat goat numbers, and there are good reasons for that. As we look at our production and consumption and imports again, this is a similar graph to what we saw with the sheep. With our imports being that dotted line, our U.S. production, the red line, and then consumption, again, being our production plus our imports minus any exports. Export on the meat goat side is almost zero. There's very, very little bit of goats that go down to Mexico, but beyond that, we really just do not export goat meat. You can see that between 2014 and 2017, we actually imported more goat meat than we produced in this country. Demand for goat meat in this country is fairly strong, and we are just not producing enough to meet that demand. 2019, our production did pick up some, 2018 and 19, and our imports did decrease just a smidge. If we look at the top 5 countries importing goat meat, United States again is number 2. We're behind the United Arab Emirates in this, and we have previously held the first spot for a long time as the number 1 importer of goat meat across the country. This is the first time I've seen it that we've, in recent years, that we've backed off just a little bit. But you can see that our imports are pretty similar to the imports that we had back in 2013. So we look at the Missouri goat meat, kind of narrow that down to Missouri out of the US. This is our meat goat inventory from 2005 to 2019. This is that blue line is all of our goats, and the red orange line is our meat goats. You can see that our goat inventory is really, our total goat inventory is really defined by how many meat goats we have. We did not follow that decline that the US saw from 2008 to 2013. We started on that path, got to about 2011 and said, we're going to try to hold on to some of these goats and produce a little more. However, we have dropped our numbers since about 2014 going into 2019. 2018 to 2019 is the first year we've actually increased our inventory since about 2013. We look around the state to see where we're producing goats. Goats are really predominantly produced in the southern part of Missouri, and that makes a lot of sense. We have a lot of woodlands here. We have a lot of mountainous features, and goats really like that type of environment. They like to browse, so that's where we grow a lot of browse, is in the southern part of the state. Again, those are the 6 USDA market reported sheep and goat livestock auctions across the state. And about 35% of our sales are to goats. When we break those goats apart and kind of see what's being sold, we can see that our slaughter animals, our slaughter goats, take up about 71% of those animals being sold through the market. 23% of those are feeder goats, and about 6% of those are replacements. So we look at market prices across the United States. We go back to San Angelo, Texas, again, because of the ease of price discovery. And this is an average annual price of goats since 2001. You can see that year over year, we've really been increasing our price for our goats. These are for our slaughter kids in the 40 to 60 pound weight class and selection ones. In 2020, our average so far for the year was $311 per hundredweight, or $3.11 per pound. In 2019, we had an average annual price of $277 per hundredweight. We had a pretty large increase in our average annual price from last year to this year. When we look at that seasonal kind of look, a monthly look at our prices, red line again is that 5-year average from 2014 to 2018. Blue dotted line is 2019, and the solid line is 2020. You can see that 2020 has really this is going to be based on demand. We've had a little more demand in our goat meat this year, and that has increased our prices and taken away some of the seasonality that we would normally see each year. This is that same seasonal index for slaughter kids, selection 1 out of Texas. This is based on the 2015 to 2019 pricing. You can see that same average annual price here with that solid line being our index, that red line being kind of the average, and then the dotted line surrounding it being a max and min around that. So it's kind of our range of what we have seen around the average during this timeline. And what we're seeing here, we have a stronger seasonal index for slaughter kids than we do for sheep. But again, you're seeing roughly December to, this one extends out just about to June. We have prices that are higher than the average annual price. And from roughly June to November, we have prices that are lower than the average annual price. In this particular index, our April was our high, and it was 11% higher than the average. And September was our low, and it was 14% lower than the average for that year, for those 5 years. We can add some pricing to this, saying that our average annual price was $276. You can then see that April was roughly $304 and September was roughly $235. So those are pretty distinct differences in the prices. If you take that out and you show a difference in selling in April and selling in September with those two pricings that we talked about, the difference is $74 per hundredweight. And what does that mean for your 50-pound goat? That means it's a difference of $37 per head selling in these 2 months. And if you happen to sell 20 kids in September versus April, then it's a $740 difference to the farm. So picking the time of year that you're selling really can make a big difference in the profitability and the revenue generation of your farm. Again, some kind of takeaways from this, target to sell your kids roughly March to April, and then December to June is when you want to sell your kids. If you can hold them through the summer and fall and hold off till December or January, you're doing pretty good. Only sell your kids if you have to between July and November. Otherwise, hold on to them, put a little extra in them, and make a little more money in the right season. Some additional tools and resources. There are budgeting guide sheets and Excel tools that the University of Missouri that I actually put together for the University of Missouri. We have both early and late kidding and lambing. The early kidding and lambing really takes advantage of those high market prices. So that's kidding and lambing January, February of the year. The late kidding and lambing budget really takes advantage of those spring forages. So that's kidding and lambing in March and April. So we've put together kind of four different budgets to help you take a look at what it means to kid or lamb in the different seasons and what it means for pricing if you're selling those lambs right at weaning or kids. Another thing I did mention earlier is I am a business counselor for the Missouri SBDC Ag, Food, and Forestry. We are an SBA hosted program at MU Extension, and I can offer one-on-one business counseling that is confidential. And so if you're interested in that, there's a link for that. One more tool that I really want to show you, I talked about the reported sales. Anybody can go and look up the most recent prices at the reported sales. It's the USDA Ag Marketing Service, or AMS, and that is the link for the sheep and goat auction reports. They have market reported sales all around the country. So if you don't happen to be in Missouri, there's probably an auction that you can look at for your state that'll kind of give you what prices are doing. I pulled two quick weight classes, one for sheep, one for goats, just to kind of give you an idea of what those market reports look like. This was a Choice and Prime Hair Breeds market report, the Choice and Prime 1 to 3s, and you can see how many head were sold, what rate range they were sold at, the average weight for all the heads sold in these classes, the price range, and then an average price range. And so when you see my graphs previously, this is where that data is coming from. Again, same with the kids selection 1, and they do this for all animals sold at that auction on any given day. So say there weren't any selection 3 kids sold, there's not going to be any prices for selection 3 kids. So it's based on what is sold and what is actually being paid for those animals. And that's all I have for you today.